save the city. Myself, Charles Lewis, the chief, the mayor, Charlottesville Tomorrow, my friend Shadi Gilliam, we all got together and we said, you know what? We need to come and just talk to the city, find out how everybody feels, find out, what's going on. Let the mayor and let the police chief kind of just talk to us as family. We have enough, in my opinion, we have enough fake news, and we have enough polished news, but we don't have any real news. We don't have any real feelings. We don't have people interjecting, saying, I'm scared. We don't have people saying, okay, everybody that's doing all these crimes that we don't like aren't from here, and somebody stepping up and saying, no, these people are from here. They have a connection. You know what I'm saying? So what we're going to do for the next hour and a half is talk real. Me personally, the chief is a friend of mine. The mayor is a friend of mine, and I know their hearts. And I know that they want peace in the city no different than any of the rest of us. So what we here at In My Humble Opinion and our friends are going to do is we're going to give you the chance to hear them talk like we talk to them as friends and family, so we can try to come together and figure out what this is. What do you think, Charles?
I can dig it.
Okay.
I can dig it, man. And this strikes on a different chord for me. This is not just some rhetoric, that we're doing. This is not just reporting news from some distant place and land and people that we don't know and understand. This is about the city that we love. This is about the people that we love. This is about being a black man.
Yeah.
Right. And this is about seeing young black boys who are just looking for life, right?
Yeah.
Looking for life.
Yeah.
And when I say looking for life, meaning growing, understanding who they are, and figured out what's the best choices to get to the point to where they want to end up.
Yeah.
And sometimes life gets so misconstrued to where they lose focus of it and make choices that they otherwise would not make.
Yeah.
And I started that by saying being a black man, because to me, that's the number one, that's the root right here. Like when we step up, when we take control of our homes, our community, that's when I think that we're going to see a real difference. Men, women, black, white, but as a black man, I'm going to say it starts with us, the foundation.
Now, one thing that I want people to understand is that I've been to the bottom, I've been to the top. I've been now where I would be considered a good role model, and I've walked the path that you might look at me with a side eye, and one thing that I know about our young black men is we don't take the opportunities that we don't know exist. Now, when I say that is that before Barack Obama, as a black child, I would have never thought that a black person could become president. And coming up as a kid, I just didn't think that was reserved for us, So a lot of opportunities to me start in the mind. Yes, because you can put $1 million in front of somebody and it will only last so long because they are not equipped mentally to understand that this is for me. And in this show right here, right, we're getting ready to address some of our friends, let them say hi, let them tell you, how they feel, what we're going with this. And hopefully by the end of it, it will at least get the conversation going where we know we need one another. There comes a time where arguments become trivial, and you need to understand that, okay, that could be your child on that T-shirt.
Absolutely.
At least in my generation, we put you on T-shirts. Now you get a little picture on Facebook.
Get a hashtag.
Until it just goes off. And that's not what we were created for. So everybody that's on here with me, I welcome you. I thank you. Elliot, Jesse, Sade, I'm sorry, I said Sade, and my friend, Chief Rochelle Brackney. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Hey, Sade, congratulations. I haven't seen you or talked to you during this pandemic, but congratulations. Please give that beautiful wife of yours my regards.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Charlottesville Tomorrow, how y'all doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a week. Glad it's Friday.
Okay. Jesse?
I'm going to echo what Elliot said. It has been a week.
Okay. Well, let's kind of jump into it. Chief, I'll start with you, not for putting you on the spotlight, but as a mode of respect that I have for you, you know. My first question that I would want to know is, why do we feel like there has been an increase in these type of crimes all of a sudden?
So thank you for having me, and also thank you for putting this together so quickly. That tells you how the community cares about these issues. That, you know, we put out a call yesterday, and today you're responding as to how you can help make a difference in this community. So violence is spiking across the United States. Homicides are up and shootings are up as well. And it's almost this perfect confluence of factors that are coming together. Let's first start with saying that I know none of us condones violence on this program. And we've learned to move through, as we've matured, different ways to handle conflict. But as our young persons have not been given or not provided the opportunities for those same tools to mediate their differences. Violence and guns are the way they feel respected, regain their power, say, notice me, I am to be considered. So why is it going across? Not only Charlottesville, but here. Most of them are often economic drivers, senses of powers. I say all the time, in communities, you will create an economy if you do not have access to the traditional business economies that middle-class America has access to. If you are shut out of opportunities to make a living wage, you will find a way to be resilient in your communities and to survive in your communities. And those maladaptive, and I'm air quoting, maladaptive strategies that we look at are an outgrowth of being forced to come up with another way to gain access and to gain entry into wealth and economies and having the same type of, you know, life that we see on TV that we want to emulate as we even walk around here in Charlottesville. I mean, it does not go unnoticed that, you know, the average home here is now going for $900,000, and who has access? Who can afford that? But you see it, and you want it just like everyone else. And you see people with cars, and you want it just like everyone else. And you want access to good food like everyone else. That's right. When I see the lines in Whole Foods and Trader Joe's all the way around in Wegmans to get into the spaces, you see people want to have access to good, healthy food. And there's no way to get that when you're squabbling over a $600 relief check.
Yeah, that's right.
People will need money, and they need it now. Again, not condoning violence, but understand there are drivers. And in this current pandemic, when you have 20, 30, 40 million people unemployed, and the gulf between wealth and those who have it and those who don't is getting wider and wider and wider and wider, and has continued on that trajectory more so in the last 4 years. What do we think is going to be the natural outgrowth of that? Yeah. And then we all clutch our pearls, no pun intended that I happen to be wearing some. Then we all clutch our pearls saying, what is going on in these community and communities across the nation?
Let me ask you this.
It's been perfectly configured to happen.
Let me ask you this. And this is a question that it took me getting to close to a police officer, as close as I am to you, to be able to ask this kind of question. How difficult is it for a person of color that is with law enforcement, knowing that the system, like you said, has been set up for failure for certain people, and still pushing the law system? Like, because you have a job you have to do. It says that if you're doing this, this is what you have to do. If you do this, this is what I have to do. But as a person of color, how difficult is it to know that the system has been set up for failure and you still have to do your job?
So being able to do this job, I've never been able to decouple my race and ethnicity from the work that I do. As you notice, I use words like criminal legal system. I don't use criminal justice system, understanding that it is not a just system. However, that does not mean that I don't play a role in this? And if I abdicate that role, what does it look like if somebody like me is not sitting in this space, really advocating for justice in a system that has never been built on a foundation of justice? However, as I tell people all the time, wealthy folks will have police in their systems. They will have them in their communities. They have the money and they can afford protections, either through their gated communities for private security and other ones. And those ones who are often calling for, the dismantling of policing systems are the ones who are not affected by those systems. So they don't care how it's being dismantled because it doesn't affect their everyday life anyway. So how do I hold that line? The way I hold that line is every community deserves to live in a place where they feel safe. Not just your home, your community. And that's how I do it. That I think about, what does fear look like? Why shouldn't I be able to, as a 5 or 6 year old, go out to a tot lot and play on the playground and not worry about shots being fired? So for me, staying in this place, understanding that there are things that we all say there that we don't condone, and that we all have to play a part in enforcing those norms, where it becomes the norm that we live in a healthy, thriving space and not the opposite. So for me to stay in this work and doing this work, I don't struggle in the same ways because I've been in this work for a very long time. This isn't a new approach for me. This isn't, I got brand new just because, Colin Kaepernick took a knee, or I got brand new after the marches that started under Michael Brown or Trayvon Martin in 2012 and 2013. I didn't just get brand new at this. So staying in this space, I feel comfortable because the approach and what I'm committed to doing to really doing no harm in those communities. You can still serve a community and still enforce public safety and create an atmosphere of public safety without one that is oppressive.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break here, but I want to leave you with something I want you to think about. What does defund the police mean to a police officer? We'll be right back with this In My Humble Opinion exclusive in a minute. For those of you that are just tuning in, this is an In My Humble Opinion exclusive where we deem this Save the City. We have on here a host of people that are looking to save the city. That's right. In My Humble Opinion, Chief Brackney, Sade Gilliam, Charlottesville Tomorrow. We're all sitting here just having conversation. For those of you that just tuned in, I asked the chief, what does defund the police look like to a police officer, or when they hear that?
So thank you. So what I've said right from the beginning is sometimes we get caught up in words and rhetoric and really not the meaning behind what people are asking for, right? So when I hear defund the police, I actually kind of just push the labeling aside to ask people, what is it that they're really asking for? And oftentimes what you're finding out is that communities want a different response than one that may necessarily have policing in it. And then they also, if the police are involved, whatever that structural system is, they want to know that they're going to be treated fairly and justly and equitably with respect when they are in that moment, when you have to dial 911 to leverage police resources, right? That is a hard enough thing to do anything on any day. To pick up a phone and say, I need some help for whatever that issue is I'm experiencing, whether it's violence or trauma or some other way. So what I normally think about in terms of defunding, this is an entire movement that I think is sustainable. For the first time, I think it is sustainable. And the reason I think it's sustainable is because of how quickly across the nation people have acted to change legislature, to the laws are changing, banning chokeholds. All the things are now codified in laws, and undoing that would be extremely difficult. What I think there should be and is a need or a call for is, what systems can we put in place to meet the overall needs of the city of Charlottesville around violence, around emotional wellness, around poverty, education, etc. And how do we all work together to ensure the success of this city? And that's why I think it's important to have individuals like Sade in this and their perspective and how we all can come together and contribute.
That's right.
Sade? How
Yeah.
what from what the police chief said, how do you think, or what would you tell her or the city that we need in our communities so that we don't have situations where we're blocking off the streets, where somebody is another hashtag, where just more loss of life? What would you say that we need in our communities?
So, one, I appreciate y'all having me, man. It's crazy because I want to give a little context to just who I am and where I am right now in life. Then I get into that question, right? So, born and raised in Charlottesville, born in Prospect, raised in the county, gravitated to the homies over at Garrett, you know what I'm saying? Had squabbles with homies over at Page Street, you know what I'm saying? And have family over South First Street. So like all across the board, I would say like I've never been in a situation where I felt like I wasn't acceptable, you know what I'm saying, or welcome in any part of town, right? And that's solely because I've always respected, you know what I'm saying, the relationships that I had, the dudes who was out there, even when I was out and not even moving right, I had respect and loyalty above all else, right? And I built relationships over time, even now where I am now in the phase of life I am now, that I can still go back to those relationships and have meaningful, impactful relationships with dudes who are either trying to transition out of certain lifestyles or they're still in that lifestyle, and we're learning how to coexist in our separate spaces, right? So I say one, for my 9 to 5, I work for the city of Charlottesville and I provide services to the reentry community, right? Anybody who's ever had a history of incarceration, I work with the Home to Hope program, and we serve individuals who have issues of incarceration and looking to advocate for fairness and housing, and employment. We just were allocating funds to the city through the COVID relief to provide housing to individuals who were, whether they were reentry, homeless, or actually have a place and they just need assistance because times are tough. You know what I'm saying? So my heart is for my people, man. My heart is for the city. And so I say all that to say to the point that the question that you made, and was the main thing I feel that we need in as a city or a community, Black community, in impoverished areas and in areas where there's no resources, is access to resources, right? So like, however that looks, as far as like, I was recently on a podcast with some brothers, right? And we got to talking about counseling, right? I'm 35 years old, and up until 4 years ago, I have never, ever had access to a counselor, nor where to find one, nor one I can identify with, nor one that I could trust. You know what I'm saying? And that's and I know they exist, right? And I know they exist, but if I'm struggling working a serving job to make $100 a week, you know what I'm saying? How am I going to afford a counselor at $75 an hour?
Very true.
If I don't have access, or people around me don't have access, listen, you are a product of your environment, right? When growing up, all I saw were dope boys. All I saw was homies toting guns. All I saw was gangbang. All I saw was set claiming. All I saw was, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't like, of course, I grew up in the 90s, but when I was like a teen, that was like in my late 90s, early 2000 years. Like that whole 90s spread where people was getting murdered. When I was out here in the streets, like when we had problems with somebody, bro, we was fighting. Right? And I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying the way things are being handled now is way different than the way my generation raised up. Like we would go over in packs to whatever hood we had problems with on weekends, weekdays, whatever, and we would just squat. Nobody was thinking about, hey yo, somebody might got a gun. It was like, nah, bro, this is what we do. We got a problem. Somebody said something at the mall. Let's go over to the hood. We gonna fight.
Yeah.
We gonna see it next time.
That's right.
And Sade makes an important point, right? So the one thing he just said that is actually a twist on the question that was asked. What do we need from the police or what do we need from the city? He didn't mention either one of those. That's the thing. We keep defaulting to what we know.
That's right.
We're not asking for anything different. We're like, okay, government, any way you want to say it, government, add the B, I don't care. We keep trying to get some sort of formalized institutional system of supremacy that created the system to fix the problem, right? So yesterday, I called for the community. And said, we have so many resources here. My streets, when I say my streets, I'm talking about from Pittsburgh, where I'm from, and I'm much like Sade. I grew up where only opportunities for women, particularly for girls, were you were in the arms of somebody. There was no idea that you were. The only way you got out of, you hooked up with the drug dealer because that was the only way you got money. And that's still going on right now today. But when I looked and saw this summer from LA to New York to Charlottesville, down to Tallahassee, Florida, Berlin, you name it, people took to the streets for social justice. If you can pull together those kind of resources, then you know what? Then go all in behind your game. Don't claim you out here for social justice and it's no justice, no peace march. If you say you're down for justice, why don't we have those same kind of community resources out there being put into these places where we know that there is a deficit?
Okay.
We know it exists. We know where the problems are. And then I'll get some text message tomorrow that says, how much of your budget, Chief Brackney, are you willing to give to defund the police so that we can have these projects, right? And I ask the question, I'll give you 100% of my budget. Then make sure you're the one that's going over there to that 911 call. You go ahead and handle that. And that's okay. And if we have systems, it's not enough for Sade to not have access to a clinician of color. If we don't have the resource, but they don't have capacity because they're overwhelmed, it doesn't matter that we're resource rich. I've asked for, where are all our influencers? Where are every one of our advocates, our social injustice and community advocates, when we're talking about this problem? Where are our educators? Where are our mentors? I've heard from one person who emailed me and said, hey, I think there's some way I can help with this violence. Okay. I think there's some way that can help. One person has emailed me. I don't have to be the person who coordinates the resources. I don't have to be that person. Right. Get somebody you trust and know and let them work with me. Heck, call Razor Charles.
Yeah, call me.
Tell them, hey, I got something, and let them get it to us. But the key is going to have to be to change this. It's going to have to come from the community, and they need to drive that home. And the other thing, this is not outside community folks that are causing the kind of havoc in this community. We want to hang our head on that the headlines were that there were 3 brothers from Georgia that were arrested. Right. They didn't just happen to find their way to the local Chick-fil-A here in Charlottesville and think that might be the place to hang out. Yeah. They have connections here. They have family here. They have roots here. And we need to start owning that so that we can then deal with the issue.
Okay, that's a perfect segue for us to take a quick break. For those of you that are just now tuning in, this is an In My Humble Opinion exclusive where we're calling it Save the City. Thank you for those that are listening. You're listening to an In My Humble Opinion exclusive called Save the City. That song was very touching there, Charles. I just want to live. God save me. There's a message in that. Okay, Charlottesville Tomorrow, you're up. I know y'all got some good questions. Y'all are more technical than the rest of us. We just having a good old time, a little cookout going on here on the radio. But let's get down to the meat and potatoes as to why we're here.
Yeah, Chief Brackney, Jesse here, Charlottesville Tomorrow. I was really interested in the very start when you were speaking about the economy and the maladaptive strategies playing a really big role in a lot of the crime that you're seeing. But I'm curious that you have spent more time and know much more about the actual shootings and the crimes than any of us here that have happened in the last 6 months in Charlottesville, where it's been really skyrocketing. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what you're actually seeing in the crimes that have happened.
So you can never say what an actual person's motive was for any of those, right? For what moves a person to pull out a high-powered weapon and just start randomly shooting throughout the community, and what moves a person to the type of violence that we've been seeing. So I'm not a psychologist. I can only tell you what the trends look like. One, as Sade was saying, that there used to be ways in which people handled their disputes and their conflicts, and whether or not we understand that there were these informal role model ways in which we saw that play out in community, right? There were older folks in the community that almost mediated these conflicts. And, there were these unwritten rules, right? About what you did. So when Sade was talking about, hey, me and my crew went somewhere else and we just kind of, went at it for a little bit and we went home and life was done, right? There were these unwritten rules. Even when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, you didn't jump anybody. If you jumped somebody, that was just considered a punk move, right? You just didn't do those kinds of things. It was either a straight 1-on-1 or it was kind of if it was even. But those are the things that you learned about by being around older generations, right? To learn what that looked like and what the culture looked like. Unfortunately, and again, owning this through the policing, we literally gutted an entire generation, 2 and 3 generations of those Black male mentors who were in the community who could have helped with that kind of socialization process on how you handle disputes and how do you handle conflicts. So there's been no persons to say, this is what you do in the community. You don't defile your community. You don't sell drugs to pregnant women who've got babies and they're not feeding. I mean, there were these rules about how you did things. Now, when we have persons who are returning citizens to their communities, the younger folks don't recognize them, nor do they know them. So when we're seeing and nor do they understand or respect the kind of gravitas that they brought with them back in the day, right, as a quote unquote OG, who could easily say this will not go on, and it didn't go on. Well, Chief Rackney, I know when I came through the system, through the streets and everything, it was no women, no children. They were off limits. That's right. It didn't matter if it was a drunk sitting around here. If you did something that went against the community, they showed up at your door. They dealt with you, and that's right. I don't want to say, like Sade said earlier, I'm not advocating and saying that was the way that things need to happen, but it was a different time. You didn't mind. It was a code. Yeah, if a kid rode a bike and he got too far down the street, they was like, no, you need to go on back up here. You know what I'm saying? Right. So there were things that, the mass incarceration took from us that. That's correct. And again, acknowledging it. So what we have to do, real strategies are being very intentional about putting back into the community, bringing into the community, introducing into the community people like Sade and Home to Hope, right? We need to bring them back into the community. We need to understand and respect and I'm going to shout them out, but we need people like Will in the community. So when he's in the community talking about, getting that fade, he's also infusing that knowledge in how do you maintain. West Bellamy's in the community, right? Who these young folks see and respect. And I can see Mayor Walker coming on to the thing, but those kinds of. We have gutted the community of those potential mentors. So then we have to be intentional about infusing them back into the Jesse, if we see it. So the majority of it is just not an ability to handle their rage, their conflict, their pain. Again, none of us is advocating for violence whatsoever, but you have to understand why somebody might pick up a gun. If you don't have any other way that you think you can cope or manage or exert your influence, you're going to come to what is expedient and what is close. That's right. And in Black communities, there's an infiltration of gun violence and guns. I'm sorry, particularly of guns. Yeah, you were. It has to be a bit of a challenge for you because that leads a bit to the trust gap that some people have, that they're not going to normally call the police if something happens. That I'll just take care of it myself. And so you're getting these things, and maybe it's another incident was related to the first one because people are handling and they're not
involving law enforcement in
That's right.
taking care of it in the community.
That's correct. And that's why we need to be careful about our language. When we have people in our own community pitting each other against each other, those persons who are informed, who are influencers, you can't then start taking hits and at people like, city officials who are trying to get something done, right? It's easy to stand on the sidelines and throw darts at people when the real work is you don't realize how you undermine a system that is attempting to be created to make communities whole. And I may not be part of that trust system, and that's okay. I don't have to be and shouldn't be, right? There's an important part about that legitimacy, but at least, as I said before, tell somebody else. Call somebody else and say, here's what we think and are afraid is going to happen. Then we can put things in place to disrupt that.
That's right.
And what I mean by disrupt, that doesn't always mean jail. Sometimes just a mere presence of more people in the area will often de-escalate stuff because people don't want to be seen and don't want to be identified as being part of it. There are so many things that we actually could do, Elliot, that I believe if given the opportunity to do, we could do here.
I'd like to welcome Mayor Walker on here. Good to see your smiling face. Now, I'm going to jump right into it because she led, the chief led to a segue that I have to ask you. Yes, we had these people taken out of the communities that could have kind of monitored and let certain things happen, but we also don't have what we used to have where the doctor lived in our neighborhood, the gas station man lived in our neighborhood, the mechanic lived in our neighborhood. How difficult is it for our community at this point where most of us don't have the credit that we need to get these businesses or pass the credit check to be able to get there, to be able to go to the city and maybe ask for money to help build up the resources inside of the city?
Is that a question for me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying that I don't think all of those people are out of the neighborhood. So I think that's one thing that we have to maybe shift from too. People are close. This community is small. It's really about going back to those principles of where your well-being was my well-being. It's not necessarily that the people are not present. So that's one, I think that's the biggest when we're talking about internally that we have to shift from. We also have to discuss that there are these long-term. So yes, we know that there has been, jobs, opportunities, education. Right. All of those things are things that I campaigned on. My entire life, they have been a problem. When we're talking about this particular time in our history, we're talking about how do people who have experienced those problems before, those traumas, have been in those situations, what is changing about where they are to where now people are dying, right? And so that's our immediate fix is how do we get people who are, who are having a very challenging time because I'm sitting here now trying to, because I know some of the community wants to say those criminals out there, and I just don't think that. That's just not how my mind works. I think people are having a challenging time, and the way that they are expressing that is what we have to figure out first and foremost, and then we move forward while simultaneously moving towards what I hope we all been working on anyway, is how to stop allowing the system that has been created in Charlottesville for generations to keep destroying people and their families, to where this sense of hopelessness that creates this expression of violence that we're seeing in the community, that stops happening. So there's those immediate things that we need to focus on, and then those things that we should have been focusing all along that we just have to speed up so that people feel like that we're actually doing something and they have opportunities. And we can't keep expecting people to wait for decades
That's right.
for those opportunities to manifest.
Well, let me ask you this, and Shada, you probably be a better person that I can answer it, but I don't think I should because I'm asking questions. When I was out there doing wrong, I knew I was doing wrong, right? So at what point do we take some accountability for those of us that are out there in industries?
But can I answer that before you?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Because this, I just want to make sure that we're having, this accountability piece.
Yes, ma'am.
Some people who are, maybe stronger than other people. We all know that. You can look at their relationships. There are some people who make it out of these systems and it don't totally destroy them and deplete them.
Mm-hmm.
And some people that we may be asking to be more accountable, we are usually assuming that they have the ability to be accountable the way that you may have been.
Yeah.
And part of helping to heal the community is to leave all the assumptions at the door and meet the individual,
Yes.
whatever that may be, where they are, and figure out what they need and how to give it to them. So that would be my answer to that. And now I'm gonna.
Yeah, no, man, Walker, you hit the nail on the head. So I was gonna initially say, like, I'm very cautious not to generalize like that. Everybody's who's Black experience has been the same as mine, right? So even in the work that I do, I recognize that anybody who comes to me or that I'm in a close relationship with, they're an individual, right?
Yeah.
So I can't expect someone who, some things that could have broke me that didn't might break the next person.
That's true. That's very
right?
true.
So they might not have, we're different people. We're made up different, right? The way we think is different, right? Someone who, it took me going to jail on my distribution charges 3 years for it to finally click.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? It might take somebody else 30 days for it to click. Mm-hmm. So the accountability factor, I think that has more so to do with individuals once once you know better, you do better. Like
right.
there's the expectation of if you know to do something, now that you're accountable for that. But if you don't see it in your community, if you don't have access to resources, if you've always been given the short end of the stick or given crumbs off the table, like if you put two hungry dogs, starving dogs in a cage, eventually they're going to start going at each other.
Okay.
Right?
Well, that being said, let me ask y'all this then. If we're looking at it from that lens, Mayor Walker, what can council do to help interject resources into these people? Because at a point, somebody has to be accountable. If we're saying that the people in the neighborhoods that we came through aren't accountable because of circumstances, can we then turn and look at council and say, okay, you have to be held accountable because I don't want to be held accountable? So I know I'm playing devil's advocate right here, but people do ask these questions. And the reason for this particular show is to talk about the things that people won't talk about. So Mayor Walker,
and
my question.
I'm sorry. All the time. I know how you roll. So
yeah.
And Mayor Walker, I have said to him on more than one occasion, the devil doesn't need an advocate. He'll run out there and say what he got to say.
So what I think, and this is the thing, we know that personal accountability piece, if there aren't people in positions of leadership that care about people, then your life doesn't change if you don't take that accountability yourself. So I am not saying that people don't have to take accountability. Mm-hmm. Saying of how we talk to people about what that looks like, how we build them up and help them believe that they even have the ability to take that accountability to make some of those changes. We have to change the way we address them and talk to them in the first place.
Is council having this conversation about helping though?
Yeah, I think we have been, maybe not everybody, but I definitely, if I'm just gonna
yes, ma'am.
I think Councilor Bellamy, if we're talking about the last two council and Councilor Edwards, all of us, and we're on here speaking primarily to, Black audience, then we were very invested because we understood what was needed in the community to shift those resources. We're talking about council's responsibility. There's never been a time in history where government hasn't played a role in creating some of the disparities that we have at this moment. So for any of us to say we're not responsible or accountable, it should be unacceptable to us all. There's no way that we are not responsible. And so, yes, we have to do our part too. And it's a major part, and it has to be major investments. One of my biggest fears at this time is what happens when you go through depressions, Great Recessions, Great Depressions, right? Who gets the short end of the stick there? And if we end up where we do not prioritize making sure people are not in a worse position, which was already bad in this community, it was horrible, than they were before the pandemic, we are really going to fail people. And trying to dig out of a deeper hole filled with disparities is going to take decades, and not just 10 years or 20 years. We're talking about 50, 100 years. And every day when I wake up, whenever I can go to sleep to wake up, I am thinking about how to fix that, and the role that the position that I currently have, how can I use my influence to make sure that even if I'm not here, that there is some accountability that we can hold the next set of leadership to, and that there is a clear kind of blueprint for where we need to go. And there have been enough conversations that people know that if we don't do it, we are not going to be surprised by what the stats look like in the coming years, and the devastating toll it's going to take on our most vulnerable community members.
Okay, I want to go ahead and take another break. I really want to come back this last 35 minutes and talk about personally, what can we do to change the narrative as to what's going on? Because reporting on it doesn't seem to be enough. Just locking people up doesn't seem to be enough. So what can we do as a community from A to Z to try to help change the narrative? This is an In My Humble Opinion exclusive. We'll be right back. For those of y'all just tuning in, this is a In My Humble Opinion exclusive called Save the City. We have all been concerned with the recent violence uprising that has been taking place. And we have a group of people here that love and want to make change. Right. So at this particular time, I'm going to kick it over to my brother, Charles Lewis, and the questions that he has for the chief, the mayor, Charlottesville Tomorrow, and Sade. All right.
Yeah, well, thank you all again for joining us. So in this last half hour, maybe a couple of segments left at the most, and I appreciate the conversation, really do, and I think the community and the listeners abroad do as well. The questions and comments are coming in, in our inbox and stuff as well. People are really appreciating y'all taking your time out to do this. So as we said, the bottom line, right, is like, we are on this air. We started IMHO not for the rhetoric, but to have open, honest discussions, bring the decision makers, the power players to the table, and to be open about it, right? So the way that I want to kick this off, as I look at, our Black female mayor, our Black female police chief, our Black news chief editor, right? Our Black man of the community, born and bred in the community, who turned his life around. So who is a living witness and example, right? And, my business partner, my friend, here, Max and Razor, so I'm looking at us, right? And so when we talk about accountability, I'm going to take the onus. I don't know if anybody else will, but I'm going to put it on myself. And I challenge everybody else here on this call and every adult listening to do the same. Because we're talking about kids. Yeah. When we're talking about accountability, let's not forget that we're talking about children. I mean, like, there's some 18-year-old children. There's some grown men that's living their second childhood. Yep. So when we say that, to me, like the mentors have to be real. And I don't even like the term role models. We got to be real models, meaning that the mistakes that I made, Sade, the mistakes that you've made, when we're raising our kids, when we impart that truth to them, they can grow up and be able to maneuver, you know, like without the unnecessary pressures of I'm a failure or, you know, like I'm not going to amount to nothing. We have to be real models, right? So the mentors, our Black professionals out there, donate some of your time.
Yes.
You know, donate your time, and not just the mentors, but the mental health professionals. We had one message come in, and they may have tuned in after this was mentioned earlier. But when we talk about the mental health needs, the access, the resource that's there, that's something like that I challenge, whether it's a grant that council can help get, whether there's a mentoring organization, you know, that we have in town, you know, like whether it's No Ego, 100 Black Men, you know, whatever it may be, I'm gonna call you out by name. Like, we need to be there, particularly the professionals that can lend that helping hand. Like I said, if you're listening and you're a mental health provider, why aren't we out there volunteering our time? UVA Equity Center, I know that they're trying to do a job of pooling together resources and to have these virtual situations where people can dial in and whatnot. So there's people making the moves, and we got to be more present about it. Last thing that I'm going to say in regards to that is that, like, I heard, you know, Brother Sade mention earlier of, you know, being 35 before knowing how to access mental health, right? And those resources. So my last challenge is directly for the parents, because I know for a fact that a lot of this comes down to, if I don't like a certain person, I ain't gonna be in the room with them.
That's right.
Or if I don't like this about you, then I'm not gonna like be a part of your organization or whatnot. And because of our stubbornness, sometimes as a people, we shortchange our next generation. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not gonna put the onus on these kids. I'm putting the onus on us, everybody listening.
Yep.
And Charles, if I could just add to what you're saying, you know, when we call for real change, and what does that look like, and how everyone can get involved. So we know jobs are an issue. Why don't we have a job bank somewhere? Like, you land bank when there's a vacancy and what can be sold off. You know, we have all of these opportunities for jobs, internships, and mentoring that you may not be able to pay them at some level, but you're giving them a skill. You know, what does it look like to be a welder or a mechanic that's making $75 an hour? You can infuse into a person's life. I've recommended job banks. We talk about, what does homelessness look like, and how do we eradicate that? You know, there are a lot of people. You want to talk the talk? Do you open your home up? What does your mentoring schedule look like? When you talk about a real-time mentoring, we should have a bank of that.
Yes.
That where we have all of these individuals that we have access to on an Excel spreadsheet that says, this is my skill set, this is what my experience has been, please match me with.
Yes.
Please match me with. Be intentional about it. You know, we don't all get the 2-year-old toddlers to be the person that we want to be involved in their lives, right? What does that bank look like for available mental health services? You know, again, we talk about resources, but if there's no capacity because people are stretched to their end, right? They have nothing else left to give. Education and literacy. We should have banks of that. People who say, you know what, I specialize in teaching adults how to read, right? So that they can make informed decisions. The key to what Sade said earlier is what his pathway looked forward. You know, when he looked out and said he had a pathway, he also had some personal agency where he could see inside that he had the capabilities, the skills, the knowledge to get him onto that pathway, to get him to his desired outcome. We have not created that opportunity in our young adults, where one, they can see their way out of here, and two, where they believe that they have the ability to do that. And we should be being intentional about the resources that we need. And again, these don't come from government. Government shouldn't be the primary source to fix these. Government should not be the primary employer of communities. We should be the primary employer of communities.
Yeah.
What does that look like, even in my humble opinion? Are we bringing young folks in, teaching them how to do
Yes,
the radio
ma'am, we is.
I know. I'm not saying you're not. But you know what I mean?
I'm with
Like, are they in those places? Are they in WINA? The CBS 19 and 29, and I may have the numbers back, NBC, which one is which, who knows? Cville Tomorrow. Do we have young folks where we're saying, let me teach you how to write? Let me teach you how to get your opinion out there. Here's how you can be heard, and nobody can shut you down.
Yeah.
So that rage and anger, you can get it out in so many different ways that can then lead to a productive, healthier lifestyle.
That's right.
If I can chime in real quick, and just to kind of piggyback, but see, with me personally, it wasn't nothing that I could see, right? It was like all I saw was what was in front of me, and at that time was steel doors, right? I was like, nah, yo, this ain't it. This cannot be it, right? Even before then, I was in situations where it amazes me how I'm even alive today, right? Somehow escaping gunfights and stuff, things of that nature that I should not be here from, right? But the thing that I had to kind of answer for myself is this how you want to go out, right? Is this it? Do I want to live my life behind bars? Do I want to continue the cycle of coming into jail, bed after bed after bed? For me, the answer was no, right? Because I was like, I just can't quit. Something has to shake. If I'm trying to change my life, it started with me with my belief system, right? So I had to start changing my belief system and how I view the world, and that changed how I dealt with my neighbor. That changed how I saw the person to the right and to the left of me, right? And I was like, you know what? I just can't quit. And that type of mindset, that resiliency, is what led me into the right situations at the right time, right? But for those individuals who don't have that, or who just don't have that type of hope, what can we do, or what can be how can they gain access to hope?
Right.
Yeah, Sade, one thing that I realized was that people in that situation don't take the opportunities that they don't know exist. You know what I'm saying? So when you don't know something is for you, you can't take that opportunity. And that's a sad place to be in.
Yeah. So to Dr. Brackney's point is not just putting back individuals that mass incarceration took from us, but also empowering and standing behind those who are there in the community right now. Like, there's brothers and sisters I know on the front line right now that's doing good work, who's been doing good work, who just don't have the resources to continue to do it in the capacity they want to do it.
Yeah.
So how does individuals who are trying to position themselves as allies from nonprofits or organizations, how do they then have an impact by channeling resources to those individuals to continue their work? Right? Everybody can't go to South First Street to have a voice. Everybody can't go to Page Street to have a voice. If you don't have a presence there, and people don't know that you're there for them, that you care for them, you have relationships there. If you want to have an impact, find out who does, and you get behind them, right? Because not everybody's not meant to be at the forefront.
Well put.
A lot of people, you have the power to be in the background and know that your work is just as important as those who's on the front line.
Right.
Well put.
And I just want to that resource piece is so big. Even if we create lists and banks of what people can contribute, it's still different if you show up and tell me for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour a week that you care about me and you talk to me. It's still different if you then can say, after you learn what my needs are, you can point me to those needs.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Left as empty-handed as I was before we started building that relationship. And that is the role anytime we talk about, because when we start talking about shifting resources, there's an assumption that these nonprofits get resources just, we are the government, whether it's local, state, or federal, are the reason that these nonprofits have resources in the first place. And then there is the private donors that are funding these nonprofits, and they're usually funding these nonprofits, some of them because passion, but there's also tax implications that they get, to write-offs that they can have from doing these donations. So there's usually a reason. Part of the conversation is how do we kind of steer everyone in a direction where they're not doing this in the traditional way. We're still looking for people who have gone through these very traditional systems, have the most education, and we are still considering them the experts. And these are the same people oftentimes who wrote the policies for mass incarceration, and we're asking them to write the policies,
Do it.
reverse it. That doesn't work.
Right.
And we know it doesn't work, but it's a very comfortable system that we have been recycling through forever. And when you read history and you read accounts of what's happening, no one should be surprised why we're still having the same conversations that we have always had, and that people who were serving in the same roles as we are today had then. And how do you do that? So when you talk about, I don't know what you said about, you said you were 35D now and thinking about mental health, right?
Yeah.
No, I said I was 30 once I actually got to be in front of a counselor.
Yeah, okay. And so the significance, I think, with just take Home to Hope right now, is you're talking about people who are often overlooked, who, even as we were attempting to create that program, that people said that these individuals are not qualified to do this work, right? And they were not the traditional individuals, and they did not have the traditional, degrees, letters behind their name to say, like, you're qualified. And what I think, if you talk to the individuals who was hired, one of them is here, they'll tell you that giving them the resources that they may not have had before, or having them see those resources in a different light, being able to say, take or leave whatever information you're getting, that you can serve the people that you are serving best with, is how we change these systems. And so we got some traditional information, so some traditional training, but them being able to say, how do we use this training? What can we take and leave, and not have to spend a decade, using a system that may not work, or a program or initiative that may not work, being able to take everything and make it their own, which means that what you have traditionally is, where's the evidence-based trainings? How do we fund what we know that works? And that's not how funding works. I often use the example of DARE. The federal government, they know DARE has never worked, but they don't have anything else to fund. So they keep funding it. Listen to those discussions, they say it, right? Well, what are we going to do if we take this away? And because they don't have an answer, they keep funding it. So they've never had a real strategic plan of how to, do that work around, which they were saying, war on drugs, and how do we help people with that? And there was never an intention to solve that. And so that's, I'm talking about policy issues and the people who are in positions of leadership, like the role that we play. And a lot of us have to remove what we even feel make something successful, and give people the opportunity to create it themselves and serve the community as a result of that. And we need more than 4 or 5 people, right?
Yeah.
to do that, and fighting even for the investment into those 4 and 5 people have been something that I've been doing for 3 years now. And so when we talk about the slow pace of change, what if that commitment initially started with 25, 50 people instead of 5 people?
Yeah.
Let me
because we have to break this cycle, and it has to stop being reactive every single time. Is that you get people who don't think it is a crisis until the violence happens in front of the Kroger, or it happens on McIntyre Road. It's that you didn't hear a lot of people calling for someone to do something when it was just on South First Street, or was on Prospect Avenue.
Well, let me ask you this, because that's a great segue to this. So, getting back to what we were talking about earlier, when you had people that said, defund the police, but we're not going to say defund the police while we're trying to solve these shootings and things. I mean, just they go hand in hand. So how do we find that balance to where Chief Brackney, and it has to be a difficult job for you. But how do we find that balance to where you interject trust in a community, but then you're expected to go above and beyond and solve the crime before it actually happens? Like, I don't see how. That doesn't make sense to me, and I'm not advocating for against the
as they're occurring, right? It's solve crimes as they're occurring. So, you know what? I would just mention something that's been trending on media based on the events that have happened at Capitol Hill, right? And how you can take over an entire building, and they were equating them to the Black Lives Matter demonstrations and rallies after George Floyd, like literally where you just have an entire occupied state and nobody put one foot on the Capitol building, right? There was not even a foot on there because it was so entrenched. And one of the things that's been trending on media says, we don't want you to shoot white people like you shot black people. Yes. We just don't want to be shot like you didn't shoot them. Right? That's the whole thing. We just want to be treated fairly and justly and equitably. And it doesn't mean you can't solve crimes by doing that at the same time. It doesn't mean that you can't get in front of violent trends by doing those things. Part of the problem is as it continues to be, is because people are connecting this defund with reducing policing, sometimes you actually need more resources to get to, as Mayor Walker said, that sense of justice, so that you can do it. When people are under-resourced, overstretched, overtaxed, being asked to do everything on a spectrum, the likelihood that you have a negative outcome is greater. That's regardless of the profession you're in. You have somebody who's in the service industry and they're working 70 hours a week, and now they have to, drive back and forth, and they've got babies to take care of. Something is going to break along there. The problem is when it breaks in policing, it normally costs lives, and the people on the other end of that are often black men, right?
So why don't we talk about racism more?
Why don't we talk? I think we talk a lot about racism. I think what we need to talk more about is supremacy, right? And that's a different thing than being racist, because supremacy talks about the institutions, and often racism lies with an individual. So I may be able to talk with an individual about their issues of racism, but it won't break the structural system of supremacy.
So what do you think affected, like at the Capitol? Because it seemed like, because if it had been, in my humble opinion, had it been black lives up there, we would have had more bodies on the ground.
And again, remember what I just said, because that system is set up on a system of supremacy. And who it was meant to benefit. And oftentimes, I'm not talking about my politics, but if you listen to Joyanne Reid a day or two ago on MSNBC, she said that the reason those exist is because of who they felt comfortable with, right? The audience that was out there, the protesters, the rioters, those persons who were involved in a revolt, an attempted coup, who did they feel like they were aligned with? When you look out along a sea of a bunch of folks who look like white males, and the people who are policing you look like a bunch of white males, which they typically are based on the demographics of policing, you often don't feel threatened at all. I've said before, over and over again, if my skin feels like a deadly weapon to you, I will always see you as a threat. If I'm always afraid of that. And so it's the system that it's built on as well. And again, if we're talking about diversifying a system, and we've had this conversation before, what does it look like when somebody like me is sitting in this seat? And somebody like Mayor Walker, we talked about it, yourselves, Sade and Elliot. Do we get the same type of support as our counterparts? Or are we always being judged with every word, every facial expression, every nuance of the words, every tone that we use is being scrutinized to such a level that we don't get the opportunities to implement the processes and programs and deconstruct programs to benefit our communities. We're just not given that benefit of the doubt.
That was good. Yeah, let's take our last break of the day. We'll be wrapping this up for the 7:00 hour, and I want to thank y'all ahead of time before we take this break for everything that y'all have done, everything that y'all have said. I know it has definitely helped me. We'll be right back. This is an In My Humble Opinion exclusive where we have deemed this Save the City. We'll be right back. I'd like to thank everybody that came on here, and I want to leave each one of you with closing words. I'm going to do things a little bit in reverse. Normally, you let the women go first, but I'm going to let my man Sade go first and tell the people what you would like them to know about the situation of the city at this point and what you want from them.
Yeah, man. In closing, I guess, you know, it's something different when you're actually in relationship with individuals who are directly impacted by the recklessness and the I guess the little to no concern for another's life, man. Especially when, you know, these are individuals who have grown up together, you know what I'm saying, or just in the same neighborhoods, in the same communities. And if there was anything that I haven't said to dudes that I'm in close relationship with, you know, it would be, man, that, you know, you have there's so much more than this, you know. I guess I get caught up in like emotion and frustration and a lot of different emotions when it comes down to seeing and hearing individuals that I'm in close relationship with, houses getting bullets in the middle of the night and or lives lost, and the frustration and the disappointment and just the disbelief and all of these different mixture of emotions comes down to, you know, people are hurting. I work directly with individuals every single day who are hurting. Outside of before the pandemic, before they were understood who they were, generational trauma, personal trauma that they just haven't ever been given the resources and access to how to work through and how to grow from.
Well put.
And people are dealing directly with these things, man. And they need to be heard. They need to be supported. They need not to be judged or generalized or seen as something less than. These are human beings who are struggling right now. And when anybody's struggling in a situation, you're looking for ways of escape. And I hate to put it out like that, you're looking for ways for escape. And a lot of people, ways for escape has been drugs. And these same individuals who are looking for ways of escape are resorting to drugs and other things that just don't have them even operating on the right frequency, where they're making irrational decisions at moments that's costing them and someone else their life.
Okay, Mayor Walker.
I think it's all about relationships, and we have to make sure that we build those relationships. I just want people to know that I understand, I get it. I know that there has to be accountability on every level, but as someone who I made it out because of how what people poured into me, that they cared about me, that they loved me. So I was the 15-year-old pregnant high school person who had, because of my relationships, I made it through that.
Amen.
And I know that it takes those relationships for people to make it through that. I have talked to mothers and know them personally. I mean, my great grandmother buried one of her sons in 1980 from gun violence, right? And so I know even personally, but I've talked locally. We have buried friends, right? When I grew up, I know the kind of pain that caused and the trauma that it caused long term. When even for the person who's committing the act, I have talked to people who sat in prison for harming people who wouldn't have done it if they had been in a clear mind and space that, when they did it, able to sit back and reflect. We actually think that those acts are intentional just because you hold a gun and pull the trigger.
That's right.
But when you're clouded by substance abuse and disorder, it's not clear, So it's not, even though you are harming people, when you are sober and able to reflect on that, you would do something totally different. I have seen the families, who are plagued by drug use and addiction, and I know the devastation that it caused in their life, and that they don't know how to show up for their kids the way we hope they was. So even when Charles was saying, I'm talking to the parents out there, when you're talking about generationally that people have experienced trauma, some of those parents, even though we would hope that they had the ability to show up the way, they don't have it.
That's right.
And so when we're talking about the accountability piece for all of us, like what does really building a system that breaks down the institutions of white supremacy and put in place systems that truly heal and help people build their way out of that and give them the room to dream and hope is what we have to do.
All right, Chief, take us home.
So I talk a lot about what legacies and inheritance are. Black communities have been given a legacy and an inheritance of they're not valued except when it's convenient for systems. And when they have been taught from the beginning, and I came from these communities, and much like Mayor Walker and Sade, could be at any other place or space except for by the grace of God, who happened to put people in my life who could help me along the way. Until we start to build systems on the premise that the people we're attempting to serve are valued and have value, every system we put in place is going to fail because the systems are not being put in there. And also, too, our communities are not told that. You know, a parent can't teach that to their child, that they're loved and valued, because they've not been taught that themselves. And it is infused generation. We have an inheritance of being loathed by the communities that we're in. And now these are the same communities that say they want to rescue us and help us. And that's why there's this trust. And that's why no one's willing to be heard. As we walk away from each and every one of these, no one else has to die. No one else has to die. And if we walk away saying no one else has to die in our communities, there isn't a single one of us here, not only here, but those who can hear our voices, who can't agree with that. And what are you willing to do to ensure that no one else dies and that we don't voluntarily put on shackles that someone else has fought to have taken off of us?
Well, Charles, I think our work is completed here, my brother.
Well, much more work to do.
Yeah, I think we got a good start, though, you know, and I'm thankful for the ones that came along for this, because I know y'all had busy schedules, you know, and you show the community that you care by giving your time. You know, resources is important, but time is just as important. Family, we got into this as a community. We'll come out of this as a community. You know, to whom much is given, much is required.
That's right.
And because we say we want better, we have to do better. Everybody be blessed. This is, in my humble opinion, exclusive.